We're now looking out at the vista of the Tulare Lake bed right here. That's all within what would have been the Tulare Lake bed. The entire valley was wild nature. Tulare Lake was a permanent body of water up until historic times, until settlement times. And it was probably almost an impossible concept to imagine haming all of that, or putting it all under the plow, or cultivating all of it. So my back is to the source of these waters. All these waters came out of the Sierra, and lake would have been all of the land that's west of us right now. The lake basically, if you can imagine, pretty hard to picture this, but the lake stretched from here clear to the Coast Range. So where those distant hills are silhouetted there, where Kettleman City is today, Tulare Lake used to stretch from here 20 to 30 some miles across the valley to the west side. Used to be water as far as you can see. The soil has been cultivated here for generations now. This area probably was first farmed in about the 1860s or 1870s. As the lake began to disappear, this lake bottom soil was and is some of the very best agricultural soil in the world. And so the productivity of this ground is unquestioned.
We're just south of Fresno County, which I just read in the paper once again is the #1 agricultural county in the entire United States. They brought in over $5 billion. You can see how clean the levees are, so no weeds are taking out any water. No trees are removing any water. The water's being channeled and taken right to a crop. May not be the prettiest, efficient. And then we got a nice little tomato field here. Well, look at the color. So you see, you got to have good drivers. So you got a driver driving the machine. You got a sorter on the back. You've got a person driving this tractor. We call these tubs. Pulling a tub. So when they fills that back end one up, he'll go to the front end. There's another harvester going right there. In the United States, 95% of all the processed tomatoes are grown here.
Well, where we are now is on this prehistoric shoreline and of Tulare Lake.
The flattest part of California.
Just about in the middle of the state, between San Francisco Bay Area and the Los Angeles Basin.
See here. There's the tip of an old one. That's probably at the tip of a spear point. Say 10,000 to 13,500 years ago. You can imagine the wildlife that was here, especially the waterfowl and things of that nature. This would probably go, maybe 20 miles of water this direction. And you would see a shoreline surrounded by swamps. You would have inlets, you would have sloughs out in here where wildlife abounds. And people would be existing on all of that. Hundreds and hundreds and thousands of people lived around this lake at the time of European contact. And it's been referred to by a lot of the archaeologists as a aboriginal Garden of Eden, especially when the Yokuts lived here.
some point in the historical past, 150 years ago, if it was a big water year, this might be all one big vast lake. There would be millions of ducks and geese out here. There was antelope, elk, sturgeon, giant fish, hundreds of pounds in size. It's the biggest lake in surface area west of the Mississippi River, Tulare Lake. And the Europeans showed up and decided to convert it into cotton farming.
Let's see, let's turn it. This is the piece that I'm worried about.
It's called signature quilt, where each resident has signed their name and then it's stitched over and in thread. Part of the valley history is part of my family's history as well.
They used to have quilting parties, and the ladies in the group, they would all get together and they would piece the top, then they would quilt them. And I've seen these from other communities. They would sign it.
At this edge is Mr. J.W. Beaver, my great-grandfather. And right here is Mrs. Kate Beaver, and that is my great-grandmother. They were married, and they became a part of this community at the time this quilt was made in the early 1870s. When they came here, there was a Tulare Lake.
Yes, here's this map of showing how large Tulare Lake actually, could expand to, the Phantom Lake. And then, I don't know, does it give a date at the bottom?
1910.
Yeah. And, people would go to the lake for a weekend or even a week, and they would camp as these men are camping. And they would fish, and they would also go on duck hunts. And actually, my husband's great-grandfather, he helped support the family by shooting ducks and selling them. And so it was really kind of important to our community all those many years ago.
This is what's left of Tulare Lake. They had ships on this lake and barges. In fact, one of my great uncles had a barge on this lake. And Grizzly Adams came and hunted here years before the gold rush. And really in just a few short years, it was trapped out. So it's actually saline. That's what I've read. When this clay soil, and this soil I've been told is naturally clay-like. There's a lot of clay in it. And so when irrigated water and the clay soil meet up, it creates salinization.
So it's salt. All this white stuff?
All the white stuff. And when this happens in a field, it's not viable land anymore. You can't grow crops on land that has that much saline in it. And so the landscape changed its course. It's just too bad that it happened so quickly, so drastically. And I think with little concern for how it was going to affect a few generations down the road. That's what it comes down to.
Looks like Arctic tundra, or something. Well, this is a big evaporation pond for agricultural wastewater. The soils of the western San Joaquin Valley are underlain by a clay layer that blocks the downward percolation of applied irrigation water and that water builds up over the years, salts. Whatever in the soil that gets dissolved goes in the shallow groundwater, and it's poisonous water, and they have to find a way to get rid of it. And the cheapest and easiest way to get rid of it is to evaporate it. So this is Rachel Carson's Silent Spring. And it's not pesticides that's the poison, but it's minerals that occur naturally in the soils on this side of the valley. And the problem that they've been unable to solve for half a century is, where do we put all this salt and the poisons, the trace elements, the heavy metals?
Try to simplify the water issues. It's where should the water go and why, and who is going to determine its highest and best use. We had an opportunity, for example, to store a lot of water in San Luis Dam, but a decision was made that that water needed to flow out the delta and to protect fish, and they didn't store that water. And now we're in a drought that's probably the toughest drought we've been in 30 years.
Call it 59. You're getting that ice down on the bottom. One reason why snow is so important to California is that in most years, when we're fortunate, it accumulates during the winter, November through March or April, and it's essentially a frozen reservoir. What we call our built reservoirs are relatively small, very small compared to the volume of runoff from the snowpack.
Right here, I don't remember ever having to do this.
And that's what's really so dicey now with all the issues with climate change, because if you, instead of accumulating snow, say at this elevation, if you're getting mostly rain, that runs off immediately, so you don't have that effectiveness of the storage that the snow provides. In other words, if we go from snow-dominated to rain-dominated winters, then how reservoirs are managed is going to change very dramatically.
Global warming. Well, if you believe there is such a thing, and there probably is, it's going to get warmer, of course. It's going to get drier. There will probably be less moisture here. If you have no snow melt in the mountains, the chance of seeing water out here is pretty slim, because that's really the source of the water, when it does have water in the basin. So I guess it depends on how much global warming that you have.
Highway 41 is the historic shoreline for Tulare Lake.
This highway?
Yes. Yep. Well, we just crossed the highway and you look there and you see all the trees You know that's a living river. And then you look here, you see some of the trees, and you just look out there towards the historic lake, and it turns into canals with gates, water diversion systems. And so you have these pumps, very powerful pumps. You have these gates and diversions. And the question is there a way to still grow cotton, grow other crops, and restore the lake and the river just like it was on the other side of that highway? I'm fully convinced that can happen. And just imagine that you're only going to use 10% of the lake to start with. And that's multiple beneficial use. Good drinking water, as well as to lay water on the lands for irrigation purposes, and for the environmental benefits and for recreational purposes, what's called quality of life.
Almost everything on the floor of the valley today is managed water. There's very little water that is not, I mean, it all belongs to somebody, to an irrigation district, a grower. It's on its way somewhere for some sort of use, a town, primarily farmland though. The spot where we're standing is where the tractor has a siphon down in the water, and it's using a pump to suck water up out of the large canal. It's following through the pipe here, being placed out in a wetland where the farm ground was relatively salty ground, but it's the sort of ground where water on that same ground can support tremendous habitat and wildlife values. We're literally in what might have been farmland 5 years ago. We're near the southeast shore, watching a female grackle come across to land in the tules, and red-winged blackbirds and dozens of ibis. There's just a richness of wildlife here because this is a restored remnant of the Tulare Lake. I guess really my fondest hope is that we can come to an understanding in the valley where agriculture and environmental or habitat conservation can go hand in hand. I think that if we are allowed to view ourselves as being in opposing camps, I don't think it's good for either one. I think it ends up creating an artificial hostility that doesn't need to be there.
Who knows what's going to happen to this? You know, they may start farming it again, or they may just let it grow over with weeds. Just not sure. I suspect at some point the lake's going to come again. I think there will be times when there's just more water than these reservoirs and these dams can hold back, and this is all going to flood again.